Hey guys, I'm on my way to do a transaction at one of the ubiquitous Alpha Marts out here in Indonesia. And you go to Japan, 7-Eleven is king. Over here it's Alpha Mart or Indomaret. Now, I want to take this opportunity to sort of criticize the American educational system with respect to liberal arts. And the biggest problem with that curriculum has been separating economics from history. And by doing it that way, it's quite convenient because you get to avoid a discussion of colonization. And if you do touch upon colonization in the United States, it's almost always from a perspective of British colonization or Dutch colonization. So the Dutch East India Company, the British East India Company, and because there's no American East India Company, it becomes very interesting. The reason it's interesting is because, of course, the new colonial companies, they don't have they're not as easily identifiable, right? They're Google, they are Microsoft, they are any American technology company that requires the data within a foreign country to be essentially analyzed for AI purposes and whatnot. And so, in the future, it's going to be a bit more difficult to explain to people, well, wait a second, these were very similar to the Dutch East India companies. And because it's quite similar, what's going to happen here is that you're going to have a battle between ideologies on both sides. And the American response to this kind of criticism has been quite interesting as well, because the CEO of Microsoft is of Indian origin, Indian ethnicity, a formerly colonized country. CEO of Google, wonderful, both of them are wonderful people, and both of them deserve those jobs, also of Indian origin. When you think about that, it looks like progress, but upon a deeper analysis, it's also a way to move forward AI analysis, machine learning, because now you have access to 1 billion people, and you're able to compete with China, which also has 1 billion people, but also has a closed system of technology to the United States, for the most part. So suddenly, what looks magnanimous isn't really magnanimous. It's almost always in someone's self-interest. And so we talk about Machiavelli. That's what we mean. The problem is when the image clashes with the reality, you end up, unless you resolve the differences, with war or revolution or civil war. And thankfully, it takes a long time to get to that point. But the other issue you want to look at is that within just history itself, you're not able to combine technology or the standards that are imposed within different countries. Now, the fact of the matter is, after World War II, there was only one standard and only one good standard, and that was the United States, because nobody else really had one except for the Soviet Union, which was more interested in building things, trains, buildings, housing, etc. And the United States, of course, if you notice, other than Cuba, which was again a response, right? That battle back and forth to the United States building, missiles nearby, the Soviet Union, whether Poland or otherwise, you had a response to that. And Cuba was a response. But you take out Cuba, and suddenly you've got the Soviet Union trying to build around its own borders, trying to expand in a neighborly, though not neighborly, fashion. So now you've got a difference here, because in order for the United States to do what it's doing, it has to expand its naval presence. How does it do that when obviously the Soviets are not going to let anybody dock in their ports? Well, we know the answer if you studied history. Hong Kong, what is that? It's a docking station for the British ships, and therefore for British trade. Not just opium, but everything else, the currency itself. We also know today, what is Taiwan? Again, it's right next to China. Do you think China would allow, in a war or any other sort of conflict, that level of easy access? What is Israel within the Middle East? The port of Haifa essentially cut off business from Lebanon, which had an active port, Syria, and now you see the differences between those countries. Now, it's not all bad news. You look at, say, but you see what happens. Look at Singapore. Singapore is, of course, almost a perfect country over the last 60 years because it's managed to balance Chinese and American influence. And that's why it's so successful in almost everything it does, including on the current Palestinian-Israeli issue. So, but you have to think about, why are these countries so upset about having, essentially a de facto military base, and really it shouldn't be called a military base, naval station, nearby their own economic zones. The primary reason is because once you're able to dock your ships there, you're able to use debt from your essentially imperial country. I hate using those terms. They're so loaded. We'll say imperial, we'll say superpower. How's that? That's a more positive connotation. The superpower is able to use its debt, its stronger currency, to wipe out competition. And so it's able to do that because it can take out debt and keep going. You can just keep going because if anything happens, it has a military that's stronger than whatever military it's faced with. So it can just keep going in debt until it overwhelms its competitors. And in some cases, that's a good thing. You look at Singapore, it was able to overwhelm Indonesia's economy. Indonesia is the richest country, one of the richest countries in the world. If you look at the diversity of natural resources, it has everything. It's astounding. Natural asphalt, cinnamon, cloves, oil, gas. It had gold, copper. It's got so many resources that the gold mines haven't even been tapped yet because they're too busy removing the copper. So why is Singapore more successful than Indonesia? Because of the superpowers that have backed it. So a tiny country is able to overwhelm within its own backyard by functioning as a naval base for a superpower, in this case, two superpowers, right? It's able to overwhelm its neighbors despite having no natural resources. This is the equivalent of the ugliest woman at the ball getting the prince. In this case, two of them. So you can see how if all the neighbors do not also collaborate and become better every year, that there's going to be resentment. Singapore has been incredible in the sense that it's invested in Johor Bahru in Malaysia. It's invested. It's right. Just the other day, the former prime minister, the son of LKY, the son of the founder of Singapore, was shaking hands with the current prime minister and welcoming him and talking about more trade, more economic, special free trade zones, special economic zones, in order to facilitate more understanding. And again, that's significant. It doesn't always happen. Obviously, it's not happening between, say, Jordan. Well, Jordan and Egypt are unique circumstances, but obviously it's not happening between Lebanon and Israel. So again, you've got situations like in Taiwan and Israel where they haven't made their neighbors better. And so you see the difference. Now, the United States and Germany and Japan put those countries in debt, but they in their own currency, in the US dollar, but they made them better. And not only, and quite frankly, if you go to Germany and Japan today, Tokyo is more advanced than almost any city in the United States. So the third issue, I'll wrap up pretty quickly, is that when you overextend your empire, what happens is you start to, in the old days, you start to take what is the gold standard in your country, you're testing it on your own people. People in your country like Coca-Cola. It's a very, very simple example, right? Guess what? People in Indonesia are going to like Coca-Cola too, so you export it. The problem is that at some point, right, if you start looking at city planning, it doesn't always translate. Different conditions, different weather, volcanoes, But the United States is so uniquely situated to be a benevolent superpower because it has such a diverse geographic landscape. So it can, with volcanoes, take its expertise in Hawaii and bring it to Indonesia. Is it doing that? I don't know. What's funny is this country also has the eagle. It's called the Garuda, but it looks like the eagle as its mascot. At once upon a time, because of its natural resources, you can imagine how everybody wanted this country. Everybody. This is the most beautiful woman at the ball. If you look at it, you're looking at what you think is probably not such a nice place. You've got these outdoor food stalls. You're looking at maybe a building that needs paint. If you look at what's really here, this is the supermodel of the world right here in Indonesia. No doubt about it. You just have to be able to see beyond what's on the surface. And you have to see the potential there as well. We talked about Coca-Cola, right? So the downside is, suddenly you start exporting, you start trying to do cookie cutter relations, right? Well, what works for us, it'll work for you too. And then you start, you start to have, this is why leadership is so important in politics. You need the right people, right, to be able to go to foreign countries and make sure that they're doing things the right way while providing a reasonable rate of return to their investors. Because they're investing, right? You can take out a lot of debt, but at some point, everybody has to benefit, and there has to be some sort of economic benefit on both sides. Common sense, right? The third issue, was one more issue where I wanted to wrap up. It is such a complicated thing, maybe I should wrap up now. But you put all these things together, and then you're looking at, I believe, just a very complex situation. And so if all the countries around you don't get better with you, you're going to have problems. That's really what it comes down to. And that makes sense, right? You don't want, just look at a family, right? If one person is much, much better than the other within a sibling relationship, there are problems in that family, right? And it's the same thing with countries that are neighbors. So when you look at the currency, again, there's obviously an advantage to being a superpower because you can print money to do whatever you want. And then you've got the military to back you up. And all you're really doing at that point is foisting your technology on this other country so that, they are going to be using and sending back the data to you in order to analyze, in order to make your country better, or to understand your country and then make it better, instead of, surveillance, right? That's actually one of the problems with a lot of other countries all over the world is that, Taiwan makes semiconductor chips. But what happens when the United States onshores all of that? Israel makes a lot of surveillance technology. I think what is it, Pegasus, so on and so forth. What happens when the United States and the NSA decide to give that to, Sweden or somebody else? How does all that work? It becomes very, very difficult. So you can see how overextension can happen quite quickly. Its relations break down within one political cycle, right? Suddenly the guys over here don't like the technology, the advancements that you brought to them. They get rid of all of that. They say, hey, go away. We're not going to support any of this. We're going to remove the military. We're going to make your costs a lot more. We're going to tax you more, right? And then we're going to invite China in here. Let China have a chance. It's not working for us, right? China's made all these promises. It couldn't be anybody, right? Whoever's got the ability to come in and essentially try to install a political leader that is favorable to their corporations and their vision. And that's why politics is so important. Because what you drink, think about what you drink, right? You're drinking Coca-Cola and Pepsi. You're not drinking Cuba's, sugar. Cuba obviously has tobacco, sugar, everything. The sugar in Cuba is amazing, right? Each country, because of its geography, has a unique advantage in something. And in Cuba, it's definitely sugar, among other things. Wrestling as well, so on. Greco-Roman and so on. So, everyone's got something, right? By the way, that's because of its relation, in part because of its relationship with the Soviet Union as well. So anyway, the coach of the Cuban wrestling team is amazing. Just a small guy, the most animated man in the whole stadium. So I apologize for jumping around, but again, the reason you're not drinking Cuban Coke, which is better, by the way, is because of all these trade issues, but also because of blockades. The United States can just blockade you and make it very expensive or very dangerous for ships to go in and out of that port and to go somewhere else. And so really, the only people who are able to go there would be the EU and China, because they would be able to stop along the way and go down from Cuba to other countries where they're doing trade. So you can't be some tiny country or a country that even with a lot of natural resources like Indonesia, right? You have to have a navy, right? You have to have all these different things. And the real danger here is that ultimately whoever has the most technological advancements is able to foist its vision on you. And that has to do, we talk about military power, it's really technological power that's backed by a vision that you can help other people understand. But it goes back to helping other people understand your vision, trying to come together, try to make the whole world a better place. It sounds hokey, right? But it's so complicated when you think about it.